Before we jump into this episode, I want to remind you that while Caitlin and Sophia are dietitians, we're not your dietitians. This means the information shared in the Food Freedom Fertility podcast is intended to entertain, educate, and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care. This information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making any changes.
Welcome back to another episode of Food Freedom and Fertility. This is our summer season, and we are doing some solo episodes on bite-sized amounts of content. And today I'm really excited about the topic because it's much more culinary than maybe we typically talk about in the podcast. And I want to talk about the sweet truth about a very cozy spice that can actually help with insulin resistance, and that can help improve fertility, whether you have PCOS or you have diabetes. We want insulin to do a really good job of talking to our cells and communicating that energy is available. Let in that energy and use it. And when we do that, when we can get insulin to communicate and play better with our cells, then we can very effectively help you ovulate better and have better egg quality. So, what's fun about this topic, something as simple as a spice that's hanging out in your spice cabinet, is that it might actually help you ovulate. Kind of sounds like, I don't know, a TikTok headline or something. But there's actually some fascinating science behind cinnamon and insulin resistance and ovulation. So if you've ever wondered, what kind of natural ways can I support my cycle? What kind of natural ways can I support metabolic health? Today's episode is going to be a treat. So you might even call it a cinnamon roll. And we're going to get down to it. So thanks for being here. We want to ditch guilt and get real results while enjoying tasty food in the kitchen, right? This is a fun topic because it kind of focuses on life in the real world and strategies without talking about supplements or medications or procedures or all these other things that maybe feel like a heavier lift in terms of what you have to put your body through. Most people that I know love the smell and the taste of cinnamon. They love how incorporating something like this helps them feel cozy. It may even bring memories of your childhood back to you. And as a dietitian that's helped thousands of women restore their cycles and improve their fertility and get pregnant, I love when we can lean heavily into food that tastes good and also has that kind of cozy essence to it. Let's dive into a bit of the science and why cinnamon is even something that we're talking about today. I want to talk about what the research says its impact on blood sugar is and cycles. Answer the question of whether it can help you ovulate. The short and quick answer, if you just want to stop listening and go make yourself a cup of black tea and sprinkle some sugar in it, is that it can. It has been shown to be really effective at improving insulin resistance. So we're going to talk all about that. Cinnamon is something I want you to think of as more than a spice. In fact, like most plants that we consume in one way or the other, it kind of looks different out in the environment where it's being grown than it does in our kitchen. Cinnamon is actually coming from the bark of a tree. I think that you pronounce this tree cinnamomum. Really similar to cinnamomum. But many people just call this tree a cinnamon tree. Doesn't need to sound fancy or put me through any heavy lifts in terms of trying to pronounce it correct. It's really from the eastern parts of the world, places like India and Sri Lanka. Many places in China even grow cinnamomum trees. In your kitchen right now, it doesn't likely look like bark. It's probably ground and is a very kind of thin powder, but it's dark, it's brown, and it has a really cozy, intense aroma. It might even make you think of the holidays. But It's been used for a long time in more traditional medicine settings. So think about the parts of the world that this comes from. This is where we see medicine that has kind of centuries of history behind it, like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic principles in medicine. And I would like to say that maybe in the late 1990s, early 2000s, our Western medicine caught up with what Eastern medicine and culinary traditions from those parts of the world kind of already knew. So when we talk about insulin resistance, what we're really saying is your cells are resistant to insulin. So, how could we take the bark of a tree, dry it out, turn it into a powder, and put that powder in our food or our tea and expect our cells to talk to insulin in a more effective way? It's all about the compounds that are in cinnamon. So this isn't unique to cinnamon. There are compounds in lots of foods that help kind of turn on different processes within our body. Cinnamon just happens to be one of those things that tastes good while it does it. So cinnamon contains compounds that actually make the cells that talk to insulin, the proteins within those cells kind of replicate the doorways that glucose goes through. So we like to call these doorways GLUT4. They're kind of this chain on the edge of your cell that insulin comes and talks to the cell. It connects to the proteins on the outside of the cell that insulin binds to. And that kind of opens up these doorways. Well, it's been shown scientifically that consuming certain amounts of cinnamon over time make more of those doorways. So those cells, these are not the numbers, but let's just say, for instance, you have 2 GLUT4 doorways on every cell in your body. Well, once you start consuming cinnamon in proper quantities and for enough time, you start making more of those doorways. So potentially the cells could have 3 or 4. And so when insulin does touch and respond to the cell, the glucose in your blood has more pathways to get out of the blood and into those individual cells. Cinnamon also has ways to kind of turn on this sensor in our cells. It's called AMPK. Very kind of fancy, sciencey words that stands for, but essentially kind of turns on this metabolic flexibility sensor in our body that allows us to not only burn glucose as fuel, but also burn fat as fuel. So think about the idea of sugar more readily getting from the outside of your cell in the blood to the inside of your cell. And then when it's inside your cell has more of an ability to use that or even shift over to using energy that's stored within your body in the form of fat. Don't think of like fat cell, think of fatty acid. That's kind of the energy component that your body would use and try to turn into effective energy within the cell itself. So cinnamon kind of helps with that communication pathway. But we can also see it impact markers within your labs, things like your fasting blood glucose number, your fasting insulin number. We've seen it linked to improvements in cholesterol markers. So while I'm talking about cinnamon in the context of fertility today and ovulation today, I also want you to be thinking about cinnamon in the context of your overall metabolic health throughout time. If you're somebody that struggles with higher levels of cholesterol, it's very common in individuals with insulin resistance and diabetes or even PCOS to have insulin signaling issues. And so we can kind of improve the burden of how much insulin we're being exposed to by improving the pathways into the cell, lowering blood sugar, lowering how much insulin we need to make. And that trickles down in a PCOS body or other metabolically challenged bodies to seeing better egg quality because we're not making as much testosterone because our ovaries are not exposed to as much insulin, kind of driving that testosterone production forward. The research in several systematic reviews, several meta-analyses, meaning it's high quality studies, looks at kind of different questions related to cinnamon and metabolic markers. So I just mentioned that it can reduce your fasting glucose. So what does that mean? Your fasting glucose is a marker along with something we call your hemoglobin A1C that gives us indication about how you're doing metabolically with your blood sugar levels. And if we have high blood sugar levels and they're not controlled for a really long time, that can turn into diabetes. Well, fasting blood glucose paired with something called fasting insulin gives us more of a complete picture. How much insulin is it taking to improve, to kind of equal your fasting glucose level? And when we see that your insulin levels come down to create whatever level of fasting glucose we have, that creates a measure and a marker that we use in a lot of research called HOMA-IR. It's a index that tells us how insulin resistant your body appears to be. And cinnamon has been shown to drastically improve HOMA-IR numbers, meaning that insulin resistance is going down. So I've said that a handful of different ways. Let's talk about why this matters specifically for PCOS. Because when insulin sensitivity improves, so insulin levels are going down, we see better communication with your hormones. That means you might have a more balanced cycle or ovulate earlier within your cycle. It can also mean that energy is more effectively getting into the cell, so you feel a lot better. Think about cells that are starved of energy for a really long time. You're still asking those cells in your lungs to breathe for you. You're still asking your heart to pump. You're still asking your muscles to lift the groceries to get them into the car. But what if all the cells that make up that muscle fiber are really tired? How do you think your body is going to respond? You're going to feel really tired. But if we can get that energy from the outside of the cell, get it into the cell, we can improve those energy stores. And if you don't feel tired, you might feel more apt to go work out. If you're not feeling super tired at the end of the day, maybe jumping in the sheets with your partner is going to be that much more enjoyable for you. So we can see energy levels improve. We can see insulin levels go down. That's also going to signal a lowering of inflammation. And in kind of the spice and culinary world, things like garlic and ginger, things like cinnamon and cloves, things like turmeric, we see a lot of these different culinary avenues provide inflammatory support, helping your body deal with the levels of inflammation that are there. One of the ways that cinnamon does that is just by lowering your insulin levels, because chronically high insulin levels really push up your inflammation overall. So, thinking about sprinkling a little cinnamon on your latte, that's not going to equal ovulation today and being pregnant a month from now. It's not a magic bullet. This is where I think something like cinnamon becomes a really fun and exciting tool, though, is that you can use it every day. You can find something like your latte and say, I'm going to sprinkle cinnamon on top. You know, a lot of people are going to big coffee shops in the fall of the year getting cinnamon dolce lattes. Leave the sugar, add the cinnamon, maybe make it decaf for your hormone's sake, but enjoy a healthy boost of insulin sensitizing flavor in something that you're drinking every day. This is one of my favorite places to add cinnamon is my morning cup of coffee. I know that I'm going to have that most days. And so I know that this is a really simple place where I can add it. Hey, Food Freedom Fertility listeners, we're taking a break from this episode to talk about our sponsor, Temp Drop. One of the reasons why Sophia and I love this brand so much is that it's an all in one solution and it's so easy to use. You wear this Temp Drop sensor on your upper arm during your sleep, and then in the morning, when it's convenient for you, you sync it to their charting app. If you've been tracking your fertile signs for a while now, you'll know that this means freedom. And isn't this the Food Freedom Fertility Podcast? In order to accurately track your basal body temperature, you need to wake up at the same time every morning. But what if you're a shift worker or your schedule differs and sometimes you sleep in and sometimes you don't? That's one of the reasons why I love this tech so much. TempDrop uses the latest scientific knowledge to bring you an accurate method of cycle tracking and identifying your fertile window. TempDrop sensor continuously monitors your basal body temperature while you're sleeping. And then in the morning, you open the app on your phone and you sync the data. And what that means is that it's not transmitting information from this sensor next to your arm to your phone all night long. And I don't know about you, that gives me a lot of peace of mind that I'm not exposing myself to radiation all the hours that I'm sleeping, because this tech makes tracking your temperature so much more accessible and really takes a lot of the brain power out of it. You don't even need to charge it every day. This is one of the reasons why I personally use TempDrop to track my own basal body temperature. Make sure when you go to tempdrop.com that you use our discount code exclusive to our Food Freedom Fertility listeners. That code is FFF15, or you can head to the link in our show notes of all these episodes. Click on that link and you'll get 15% off today. Now, we don't have amazing studies about how cinnamon turns into ovulation in a PCOS body because there's not a whole lot of money behind that. The cinnamon farmers in Sri Lanka don't have big pockets to implement a research study like this. Who's going to fund that? There's no billion-dollar drug at the end of the rainbow here. If I had $1 million lying around, maybe I'd throw some of that at this research. I don't at this point, but it's not a hard line to draw from cinnamon intake to improved insulin levels, lower insulin levels to lower testosterone levels, and ovulation. So, can cinnamon help you ovulate? Let's look at the research that is there. There's a small, but I would say a strong study that I love that was randomized and controlled, where women with PCOS had 1.5 grams of cinnamon daily for 6 months. It's not a huge amount. That's like less than a teaspoon. Okay. They had more frequent menstrual cycles. They had confirmed ovulation, and their insulin and androgen levels both improved. Not statistically significantly, but they did improve some. So in this study, we don't see the levels of change within the lab work, but we do see the change within the bodies themselves. This may be because we need a little bit more of a dose. Animal studies back up a similar mechanism showing that cinnamon can restore normal ovarian function and hormone balance. But when we start looking at the studies that maybe aren't so PCOS specific, but diabetes specific, and that look at higher doses of cinnamon administration, we see some really powerful research. I'm going to read you an abstract from a study that I was reading earlier. I came up with the idea of this episode because I'm writing a book on how to get pregnant with PCOS, and can feel like you need to take a million supplements or you need to do a million different things. But cinnamon is something you probably have in your kitchen right now, and you can find more culinary uses for it than adding it to oatmeal in the morning. We can be more creative than that. And so while I was kind of working on this portion of spices and nutrition for PCOS. And also because we decided to design a blood sugar support supplement within the PCOS formularies line where we're actually putting cinnamon in that supplement, it felt really relevant to have a conversation about something kind of so easy to access. It's not expensive. You probably already have it. And maybe you can brainstorm one or two ways you could use it throughout your day. For me, that's in coffee. I also would consider tea a great spot to add that into. But I added into other things like baked goods and even curries and my spaghetti sauce. One study that I think is really compelling. Now, this is in a group with type 2 diabetes. So the level of insulin resistance that they experience is higher than the level of insulin resistance that is like a baseline in PCOS. But they're also looking at higher doses of cinnamon. So this study was done in 2003. Let's see what the name of it is. Cinnamon improves glucose and lipids of people with type 2 diabetes. A total of 60 people with type 2 diabetes were split into two groups, those that received cinnamon and those that didn't, and then split even further into some groups based on dosage. So 1 gram, 3 grams, or 6 grams daily of cinnamon. And then there were corresponding groups that they were compared to with 1 gram, 3 grams, 6 grams of the placebo. They took the cinnamon for 40 days, followed by a 20-day washout period, meaning they were given pills that didn't contain cinnamon. After 40 days, all 3 levels of cinnamon reduced the mean fasting glucose by 18 to 29%, triglycerides by 23 to 30%, LDL cholesterol by 7 to 27%, and total cholesterol by 12 to 26%. There were no significant changes in the placebo group. So in this study, and you can go find this study, this one's really easy to access, even if you don't have medical journal rights through your job or through a university, because it's actually from 2003. But what they found was that even at this 1 gram per day, remember the study we looked at with PCOS was 1.5 grams, but up to 6 grams per day, that they saw improvements in glucose, in insulin levels, in cholesterol, triglycerides, LDL, all moving in the right direction. There's a lot more research, so hang out and check out my book when it gets released. But for the purposes of this segment in our podcast, you probably are asking, like, does any cinnamon count and how much? And give me some more ideas on how to utilize it. So how much cinnamon do you actually need? I would argue that it's worth probably getting at least 1.5 grams per day if you're going to do this. And that's only 3/4 of a teaspoon. It's not a lot. 1 teaspoon equals 2.6 grams. So if you aim for like a rounded 3/4 teaspoon or a leveled 1 teaspoon, you're getting closer to a significant dosage. And I would opt for, when possible, Ceylon cinnamon. So that's CEYLON. Instead of what's more common in America and our grocery stores, which it may not even be labeled what type it is, but it's a cassia cinnamon. Ceylon cinnamon is what people call a true cinnamon, and it's a little bit more expensive, but it has some benefits that are important. There is a compound within cinnamon called coumarin, and in high quantities, it can be a little bit hard on your liver. And so if you can choose the one that is Ceylon cinnamon and that's palatable to you, it has lower levels of coumarin and will be just like a little bit less of a stressor to your liver. Ways that I like to incorporate it in my tea, in my coffee, I'll do cinnamon over some nuts in my Greek yogurt. I like to cut apple slices and sprinkle cinnamon over it and dip it into almond butter. I put cinnamon in my smoothies. When I make chia seed puddings, I put cinnamon in. I mentioned earlier curries, spaghetti. If you are going to eat something like an oatmeal, check out in the PCOS app my oatmeal bake that is much higher protein. And in that, we like to add a lot of cinnamon. We're looking for consistency here, but just know that in that study that I read you, that they took it for 40 days and then didn't have it for 20 days, even at the end of the 60-day window after the washout, a lot of the benefits of cinnamon were still seen. So the impact of this when you're consistent can be cumulative, and it can last a little bit longer than your last dosage of it. Don't even think about it as dosage though, because it's delicious and doesn't need to be taken in a pill necessarily. The last thing that I really kind of want to leave you with is the idea that folding in different culinary ways to support your fertility can like happen over time. It would be okay to spend the next week working on ways that you can incorporate cinnamon into your diet. And then the next week, start tracking how much protein is in your lunches and strategize on how to increase that protein number. It doesn't need to be this or that. It's kind of like we're folding things in. When you make food, you can layer flavor with salt and seasonings. And I would challenge you to maybe look for something that could be high protein and delicious that you could find cinnamon, that you could add cinnamon into this week. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. When I think about cinnamon and the idea that it can help me ovulate, I have to just give a shout out to Temp Drop, who is sponsoring our podcast this season, because Temp Drop is kind of like cinnamon. It's easy to incorporate to your everyday. You don't have to wake up at the same time to take your basal body temperature. You don't have to even make anything different to eat. You can just throw cinnamon on top. So shameless plug for such a kind of aligned sponsorship that we have this summer. I would love if after you listen to this episode and you add cinnamon to something in your day today, that you would tag Food Freedom Fertility on Instagram and maybe tag me, PCOS Fertility Nutrition. If you do not have insulin resistance, you can still add cinnamon. It can still lower inflammation. It's still a great spice to use and to know that it's improving your fertility. See you next week.